Hey everybody, welcome to this week's live chat. I almost forgot to go live because I was reading all the chat comments, so thanks to everybody that arrived a little early. I definitely love getting on there and answering some questions and just seeing where everybody's from and, pretty much participating in the conversations. So in this week's live chat, we're going to be talking about feathers, and feathers are one of those designs that can be tricky or intimidating. I know that when I started machine quilting, I really struggled with them and I wanted to learn them so bad, and it finally clicked, and then I feathered everything until it would fly. Well, not really, but almost. So in this live chat, I'm going to give you some practical tips on how to make your feathers look better, how to avoid mistakes or make the mistake that is the least noticeable, and show you different areas to use your feathers. So it should be pretty entertaining and informative, hopefully. But what's kind of fun about all the electronic equipment that I have, I'm going to take it old school with my dry erase marker. When I would teach classes at Guilds, back before the pandemic, I was just thinking it's been almost a year since I taught live. I miss it so much. I would always ask the Guild to have a dry erase board and some dry erase markers. I can't tell you how many dry erase markers have given their life for my career. It's always great to draw them out so that you can see how it goes together. Now I know that some people have a long arm, some people are on a sewing machine. That doesn't matter. The design still goes together the same way. And I always say 80% of quilting is just knowing where you're going. I mean, I'm completely making that up, but it sounds like it could be correct, right? I'm going to show you the path of it, and then you can go and practice on your machine, the machine that you have. As far as quilting it, it's the same. You either move the fabric or you move the machine. Either way, you're still going to create your feather. So I am going to try to pop on over to the chat and see if there's any questions. It's kind of hard since I'm kind of doing this all by myself. So if I miss this question, definitely leave it in the comments after the live chat, because I get back on there from time to time and answer them. And hey, while you're at it, you can also give this video a thumbs up. That really helps other quilters find it as well. So if you don't mind doing that, that would be great. So using my dry erase marker and my super high-tech whiteboard, we're going to start talking about feathers. Now, there's so many different kinds of feathers out there, right? The two that I use the most are a more basic kind of feather and a more custom kind of feather. So if I were just going to quickly sketch out the more basic kind of feather, it looks like this. Now, don't worry, we're going to talk a little bit about how I'm doing this, but I just want you to see what it is we're working with. Love the dry erase markers. So this is a more basic feather. It doesn't have any backtracking. It's a lot quicker, but sometimes I want a little bit more of a custom look. Sometimes this will be called like the backtrack feather or the bump hump feather, but this is one that I would do if I want it to be more of a focal element, if I really want it to stand out and kind of, draw attention to it. So these are kind of the feathers I'll be talking about. But the tips that I'm going to give will be practical no matter what kind of feather you're using. So if you're thinking, well, I use this such and such feather, it will still hopefully help you. So when I started quilting for customers, that was the best experience to quilt a lot of different quilts in a lot of different situations. And so over the years, I've definitely found there are some things that will make your feathers look better. If you've ever tried quilting them and you're like, I do everything correct, but it doesn't quite look right, then hopefully this is going to help make some sense, okay? So tip number one, let's erase this. The first element of our feather is the spine. It's that middle section that all of our petals or our feathers come off of. If you're quilting the spine and you want it to look better, I think the best thing you can do is to make it kind of curvy. Now, a curvy spine can be a little bit more difficult to quilt because it's moving around on you, but I think it flows nicer and it has a more elegant look, as opposed to quilting just a nice straight spine. Here's my thought on this. Now, I'm only the expert in my opinion, but I do have a very specific opinion about the spines of my feathers. If it's really straight, the eye can follow that pretty easily, and any mistakes will be more noticeable. That's what I think. So if I'm quilting my petals and maybe they cross over or they're not quite right, I think it's going to be a little bit more noticeable than if it's curvy. Now, I'm not talking about doing something like this, right? You don't want to do that. That's going to just drive you nuts. A nice, gently kind of curve, right? And so that spine is going to kind of lay the foundation for where your feather is going to go. So if you're wanting this to fill a specific area or go in a specific direction, you can mark out that spine beforehand just to kind of give you a guide. So nice and kind of curvy. Again, this is all up to you, whatever you think looks good, but that curvier bit is going to help. So as I quilt my curvier spine, if I'm doing that more basic feather, I'm going to quilt my petals, and we'll talk about why I do one side than the other. But what I want to talk about here is sometimes that spine is curving towards my petal, and sometimes it's curving away. So sometimes I'll reach it sooner, and other times it'll take me a little bit longer. That doesn't matter, I'm just going to keep going until I reach it. So don't let that curviness overwhelm you. It's just going to give it a nice, elegant look and help kind of detract the eye from any mistakes. All right, so that's number one. Number two is I really, really want to make those petals look like they're merging into the spine. If there's nothing else you remember from this chat, I mean, besides my funny jokes, hopefully that is it. That's the trick that will really help you. So as I'm quilting my petal, and I call those petals, feathers, whatever you want to call it, as I approach that spine, I want to quilt it so that it looks like it's merging into that spine. Almost as if it's like an on-ramp, like you're getting on the highway and it's going to become one with the spine. Can you tell how important it is? I want it to merge with that spine. This is going to do a couple of things. First, it looks more elegant. Second, it's going to set you up to have room to add your next petal. All right, so if I'm quilting them so that they're merging into the spine, that means I have to kind of look ahead of where I'm going. If I'm quilting here, I can't really look right at my needle. I need to kind of see when that boundary is coming and move into it. So looking ahead, trusting I'll get there, and continuing on. Now, if you don't make it merge into the spine, it's not the end of the world. I just think it doesn't look as good, right? So here we have a couple that merge beautifully. Notice how that one doesn't. So instead of, coming into that spine, it's intersecting and crossing over. Well, I think it doesn't look as nice, but here's the most important issue that you might come up with. It doesn't really set you up very well for the next one. And what'll happen, or what could happen, is pretty soon you find yourself going the opposite direction. Now, maybe you won't. That's just what happened to me all the time. I would be quilting my feather one way and then be like, what happened? How did I end up going the opposite direction? This was it right here. So not intersecting, merging. So let's do that again. So we have our nice curvy spine. I really want to look like it's merging in to that spine. And just like I said, if it's curvy, as if it is coming towards me, I won't have to go as far. If it's going further away, I'm just going to keep on that trajectory until I merge into that spine. But what happens if you're quilting along and then you're like, oh, I forgot, somebody distracted me, I got whatever, caught up in something. If you catch it in time, you don't have to rip it out. I don't think anybody becomes a better quilter just by ripping it out, right? So what I would do is if you catch this in time, just travel down just a bit and then get on the right track, and it will kind of help hide that. And of course, if you get done with the quilt and you absolutely can't live with it, then you could just take out that one little bit right there and it will look good. Okay, so merging into the spine, and let's do that more custom feather, right? The one that has where I swing out and backtrack and in. I still want it to look like it's merging into that spine. It's very important to me because I feel like it's going to make it look more elegant, really kind of draw it down in there. But look what happens if I don't. I mean, technically this is correct. It's not bad, but what's happening? I just don't think it looks as nice. There's something about it merging into that spine, kind of following that. And so if you're struggling with your feathers, that could be part of it. So making it merge into the spine. Okay, so that's all easy to say, right? Especially when I'm behind the camera just drawing it out. What do we do in real life, right? Because in real life, I ideally want it to merge into the spine. I want it to come around. I want it to go into that spine, travel just a bit, and come into my next one, right? So it's kind of coming into there. But that is really hard to hit, right? That one line of thread that is your spine of your feather is very thin. It's very hard to hit it. This is even a dry erase marker that's thicker, and it's still hard to hit it. So if you're having trouble getting your lines perfectly on that spine, well, congratulations, you're perfectly normal. What I like to do is stop just short, right? So if I'm going to make a mistake, I always try to ask myself which mistake is going to be the least noticeable. So as I come around, if I know I'm not doing a great job with it, I can still stop just short and then go into my next one, right? I think this will look better than if I'm crossing over. right? So with this side, I could say, oh, I like the spacing between it or whatever, but we know it's just a different mistake, just less noticeable. So when in doubt, just stop a little short and then go into your next feather. But it still would look like it's going to merge into that spine if it were to continue on. What's happening here is that anytime we get a buildup of thread, it's going to draw attention to it. So not only is it not correct in theory, it's going to draw attention to it. So I would much rather stop just short. And if I'm being honest, I'm usually quilting in a pretty quick rush. I quilt pretty fast, so I'm usually, moving on to the next before I even get there. So nice curvy spine. We really want to make our petals merge into that spine, very important. And here's the next thing we want to do, tip number 3. You want to make your petals nice and big. The feathers are big and beautiful, but what happens is, especially in a class setting, when I'm teaching, people are nervous that I'll see their quilting, so they start quilting them really small, really tiny. Well, that's fine. It's not technically wrong. It just doesn't look as nice, in my opinion. I love how big and full those are because I'm going to put filler around to really show them off, but it's going to just really kind of fill that area faster. So it's quicker and it looks better. But here's the deal. I know it's scary. When you're quilting a new design, it's really hard to leave that comfort zone to really kind of go over there. So what we're going to do is give yourself a little bit of a guideline to follow. Hold on one second. All right, so if I'm quilting my spine, let's say that this is where I want my feather to go. What I would do when I was newer at this, I would take my water-soluble pen, not a marker, but I would just mark a guideline a couple inches away from my line. So this is actually just like a reference line. It's not an actual quilted line, it's just a reference. But what that's going to do is that's going to give me something to extend to. That's going to show me how far I need to go. It's going to give me my boundary to fill in. So all the way out to that. It's just going to look nicer and it's going to go a lot further. So making those petals bigger. I know it could be scary, but trust me, it's going to look better that way. So let's see the other feather that I like to do that more custom feather. Again, I could have my reference line over here, and then I can really extend them out. And we're going to talk about how to fill in irregular shapes or fill in different shapes, but for the most part, this is what we're working with. All right, here's the benefit of doing this. It seems counterintuitive, but when you make it bigger, it actually detracts from your mistakes more. I know it sounds weird, doesn't it? But when I have this unquilted area, I always say, if you've taken any quilt alongs with me or anything like that, our eyes are drawn to the unquilted area, that contrast. So this unquilted area is what's going to really kind of show, not so much this backtracking, not so much the quilting. So trust me on that, it's gonna be fine. If you're practicing and you're newer to machine quilting or especially feathers and you're like, oh my gosh, this is freaking me out, practice drawing them over and over and over again. Once you get the idea of where to go, then transferring that to your machine doesn't take quite as long as you might think. Okay, ready for another tip? Hopefully. So we've seen 3 of them. Number 4, this one isn't as important and this is more subjective, but something I like to do. I always go one side and then the other. So I like to quilt top to down. That's just how I've always done it. And so since I like to quilt top to down, when I do this other side, I'm going to get back up to the top and then work my way down. Right, so that means I'm going to echo my spine and then do it this way. Okay, so what does that mean? That means if I'm doing this is going to be a fast drawing, I could come right back up the other side like this, right? And I'm going to get the same thing, and if that's how you do your feathers, perfect. If it's working, don't change it. Just do what you already do. But I like to quilt them top down, so instead of making my life difficult, I just get up there and do it the easier way. But here's something else that I like, and again, this isn't as important, but I love to leave a little space in between my stem. So my spine and then echo, and I have a little unquilted area right there. Okay, so why is that? I'm so glad you asked. I think it just separates these lines a little bit and gives me a little bit more wiggle room when it comes to quilting. Helps me hide those mistakes a little bit more. So if I happen to cross over a little bit, at least it's not going to run into that other line and be as noticeable. Again, our eyes tend to be drawn to that unquilted area, and so it's just going to help kind of detract from that. And plus, it gets me back up to the top where I need to be. All right, so there are situations where maybe this isn't ideal. Since I'm quilting my feather top down, I need to go back up to the top and then do that one. Okay, if I'm quilting a long border, that might not be so ideal, right? I would have to echo all the way back up, but I'll show you how I get around that here in just a second. So you could definitely leave that part out, but the thing to remember is if you find one direction easier than the other, bottom up, top down, just do it in the direction that feels comfortable, okay? Now, that's for this basic feather. If I'm working with that more custom feather, remember that one that kind of goes out like this, what makes this one just a tad more difficult is this backtracking right here, this little backtracking, but it just looks so pretty. Well, I'm already at the top. I need to get back to the bottom, so I'm still going to add my little echo and continue on. Again, that's up to you. I just like how it looks. Helps separate those lines and helps, make it look more perfect even if it's not. Now, one drawback of doing this also is I have to do one side and then the other. I can't work them both as I go. So if you were thinking, I really want to get this done quickly, I don't care if there's backtracking on top of it or more thread, then you could do both sides at one time, right? I could go 1, 2, and I could do the other side, and that will work as well. It doesn't matter. So you just have to kind of decide what it is that you prefer, especially even like with this custom one, you could do 2 on one side and then jump over and do the other. So that is more beneficial for that situation, but I still go ahead and leave that space in between. I like to do one side and then do the other because that's just how I've always done it. But if you found a routine that works for you, don't change it. Definitely stick with it because that's where you're going to find that success. Okay, so hopefully those are just a few tips. We're going to see how to put these in practical areas. But what I want to say is as you're practicing drawing, practice and focus on these few things, right? Making your spine curvy, making it merge into that spine, giving yourself a little bit of an echo, and making those petals nice and big. All right, so once you have the basic of the feather, those tips, then you'll refine it, and the more you do it, the better it looks. In the chat before we started, somebody commented, do they ever go, mine looked like a, I don't know, practice drawing or like a child drew it. Did they ever get better? Definitely. The more you do it, the better you get. But I think you'll see it's not quite as daunting as you might assume. Okay, so we have our feather. That's all well and great, right? It was like when I started quilting, I was like, okay, now I can quilt a feather, but I don't know where to use it or how to fill in these irregular areas. So how do we make it fit these different shapes? Because you can use it in a lot of different areas. So one way, I want to make sure I got all my notes there. I love to use it in a border. All right, so let's pretend this is my border. And I should mention that somebody also commented before, does anybody else notice that one side of the feather is better than the other? So you quilt the right and it looks great, you quilt the left and it looks like not so great. That's completely normal. I think it's because most of us have a dominant side and one just seems to make more sense. But the more you practice, the easier it gets. I promise. I promise, I promise. Okay, so filling in your feathers in a defined space. So if I'm working within a particular area and I want the feather to fill the whole thing, well, the good thing is we've already practiced with our guidelines, right? I'm still gonna quilt my nice kind of curvy border, and then I'm gonna continue, and then I'm gonna start quilting my petals, and I'm gonna really make sure that it fills that whole area. So remember, just like I've said already, I think people will notice a gap in the quilting before they notice an error. So I really want to fill in this whole space. I need to be looking ahead. I need to start my turn before I get to the edge and then curve in, backtrack, and then continue on, right? Okay, so sometimes that's easier said than done. Now look here, my spine is curving away, so I'm going to backtrack. I'm going to have to go a little bit further to get there, but I'm going to keep going until I merge into it. I'm still going to travel out and then add my next one. So some of them will be long, some of them will be short. It's going to be fine. I'm not worried that they're all the same size. I'm not worried that I have the same number on each side. I'm just trying to fill this area in as much as possible, knowing that when the whole thing is done, it's going to look great. Okay, but what happens if maybe I don't quite get it to the edge, right? Maybe I have something like this. Well, this is where echoing comes in handy. I like to say echoing is your best quilting friend. If I've quilted along this length, and I could be like, oh, you know what? I need to come back in and I need to fill that in with some echoing and then continue on. So don't be afraid to use echoing to fill in those gaps. And then I'm gonna come down, add my next echo, and then work my way back up. So right now we're just talking about how to fill in that defined area. This is a great way to practice when you're drawing. And it's funny because people always say, well, I don't draw very well. And I'm like, well, that's good because we're not drawing to make it look good. We're just drawing to know where we're going, how it flows, how to make the design, and filling in that area. Again, remembering that if I have a gap in there, I can fill it in and continue on. Now, I don't want to get too ahead of myself or too deep into this. If you're like thinking I'm still trying to remember how to quilt that petal, then just ignore this. But if this is the outer border of my quilt, I need to remember that I need 1/4 of an inch space because of the binding. So what I don't want to have to do is have to come back and chop off part of my feather. Okay, so this is a defined area, but you don't have to quilt it straight along the border. So when you're looking at your feathers, they can be continuous where they hook into each other. I could continue quilting all around, or they could be broken off into chunks. They can be quilted into blocks and into smaller sections. So let's take this right here and let's go back to our border. And usually there's more to our quilt than just the border, right? We have our border, then we have our center quilt over here, and then our next border over there. Might as well go ahead and just fill that in. I could quilt it so that it wraps all the way around, but that's really tricky, and I don't like quilting long chains of feathers. I mean, I will if I have to, but I like to break it up into more manageable chunks. So what I like to do is I like to quilt the feathers so that they run off the edge, right? So maybe I quilt it so that my feather goes from one side of my border to the other. Right, there we go. So I'm like, great, perfect. Well, now I don't really have a defined area to fill in, do I? Because I have this unquilted area right there. That's all right. I'm just quilting it, and I'm going to use the echoing and filler to fill in the rest. Right, so here's my chunk. Here's what's great about this. I get to practice within a little defined area. I'm probably holding my breath because I'm new at this, but that's okay. I'm not going to pass out in the time that it takes me to quilt this. And it's just one little chunk. It's not too overwhelming, right? But then what I'm going to do is use the filler around it. And we're not going to get into this. We'll just say it's filler to get back up here so that I can add the next part of my petal, next section. Now this is a little bit, I won't say advanced, but this is next level kind of stuff. But the thing I want you to remember is that you don't have to quilt it in one continuous line. You can break it into chunks and make it more manageable. And then I can use my filler to fill it in. Here, just pretend this is pretty. This is so pretty, 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 pretty. And then I can come back over here. I could add my echo line or just skip it. And what it's going to give me, it's going to give me this effect that it looks like it's running off the edge, but it was actually easier than trying to hook them together. So back in the day when I would quilt a lot more for customers, I did that a lot, that feather that wraps around, but then I realized this is difficult. I'm going to quilt it like this. I'm going to call it a wild feather because it likes to run off the edge. And then I would tell my customers I wasn't going to charge them extra for the treatment there. No, I didn't actually say that, but it's true. You can use it in a lot of different ways. So you can fill into a defined area, or you can quilt it and then fill in the rest of the area with your filler. But that's just a straight shot, right? That's, I mean, pretty, I'm not gonna say easy, it's pretty applicable to areas of our quilt. But what happens if you want to quilt a feather in an irregular area or a shape that's not, rectangular? So let's do like a diamond. In general, I prefer to put feathers in shapes that are more vertical or longer than wide. I don't want to go too wide. If I have to, I'll just put some filler. But this is a perfect example of filling in a regular shape, right? So starting from one side, I'm going to quilt my spine, trying to keep it somewhere in the center, and then I'm going to start quilting it. But now my area that I'm filling in is this weird shape, but it's fine. I'm going to extend it out just like I would anyway. It's just going to force me to make them a little bit longer sometimes and a little bit shorter other times. So I just a little bitty pebble right there. Echo and fill on the other side. So once you get the hang of practicing your feathers, or you're getting comfortable drawing them, start giving yourself some really weird shapes to fill in. This is what's going to help you see that, okay, this works no matter what area I'm filling in. Now, we already know the answer to this, but it's kind of a test, right? What happens if I quilt it like this and I have a big gap right over here? Well, if the gap itself is smaller than the element, which it is, I think it's fine. I wouldn't worry too much about it. But if you were like, oof, I don't like that, I could come back and just add some echoes and fill it in, right? Because This is what's going to pop out. We're not going to see that some have echoes and some don't. It's going to be fine. So filling in those irregular areas is going to be really, really helpful. Okay, but maybe I have you convinced that you want to try feathers. You're like, all right, maybe I'll try it. There is a simpler way to practice. If you're thinking, I don't want to do both sides, or I have trouble on the left side and only do it on one, you can quilt it so that you just do one side of the feather. And this is especially helpful if I'm filling in circles. So I have a tutorial on this, on the feathers. I did a free motion quilting with feathers challenge. You can find that video, or those videos in my YouTube channel. But what I can do is I can quilt my spine so that it's curved, right? So that spine, wherever it goes, the petals will follow. And then once I get to the center, I can start quilting my petals. Again, look how they're merging into the spine. I just don't have to go as far to make that happen. And they're filling in that area. Again, so important. I want to fill in that area. That means that some of them will be bigger and some will be smaller. I'm okay with that. It's supposed to be that way. And I'm going to keep working all the way around. But what's nice about this is then I just have to do one side. What's a little tricky about it is trying to keep on the right track. But once you get the hang of this one, it's a lot of fun. And a really good way to use feathers in shapes that aren't quite big enough for feathers. I always look at a quilt when I'm quilting and I think, oh man, I wish I could fit a feather in there because they're my favorite to quilt. This is also something I like to do in squares. So corners of blocks, like if it's a cornerstone or the border corner, same thing. I'm still going to quilt my spine, except I'm just going to have some areas where it's a little bit more irregularly shaped, and that's fine. I'm just going to extend that out there. And if I'm drawing it kind of fast, it's just because, I've done this a time or two. And knowing that if I don't quite fill in that whole area, I can come back later and I can add some echoing. Especially if I'm doing some kind of filler over here, I might hop in, add some echoing, and then hop right out. So just making sure we fill in all that area. All right, I got 2 more things to show you. This chat's going to go a little bit long, obviously, but what can I say? I love talking about feathers. That feather, using one side of it, is great to use in a meander. Perfect way to practice because I can quilt my little circle. I can practice my feather, just the one side. Oh, and if you check out those videos, that whole challenge, there's diagrams that you can print out that will show you how to do all this. And then I can maybe add a little echoing and then add something else, right? So now it can become more of a little piece of the bigger quilting, and that's just going to help take away some of the anxiety of doing it. It's one thing to know how to quilt a feather. It's another thing to commit to quilting it as a motif in the center of your quilt, right? So this is going to make it just a little bit more manageable, a little bit easier, and it's nice and fun. I like how it kind of looks kind of florally. It has like a little bit more of a softer look, and I'm getting experience quilting those petals without committing to the bigger element. So hopefully that helps. All right, but I got to tell you, when you're quilting your feather, you have to remember you're going to put other stuff around it. Rarely have I ever seen a quilt that has this whole quilt and one feather just right here in the center, right? Other things are going to go around it. So you have to trust me that when you're quilting your feathers, that even if it's not looking good in that moment, that there's going to be other stuff around it. And eventually it's going to blend in. So I know it's hard to keep going when you're not happy with how it's looking, but if you just keep going, I think you'll find that it works. I do want to show you how to do a Paisley feather. I have some tutorials on this, and this one is one of my favorite feathers. It's basically the spine and little Paisleys, but here's the trick. It uses echoing to help build it up. So if you're wanting a feathery kind of look, but you're not comfortable doing those petals, especially as large as they are, this will be the one to use. So it's going to be a swirl. It's going to have that long stem, that curvy, but it's going to end in a curl at the end. Doesn't have to. This is just how I like to quilt it. But remember I said that this design is it has a lot of echoing. It's echo heavy. Now here's why that's amazing. If the first one doesn't look good, just quilt some more lines around it and soon you won't see it anymore, right? So I'm going to echo, echo, echo and build up that. This is actually acting as the spine of my feather. Now what's great about this particular one is now as I start to add my petals or my little pieces, I can make them a little smaller. Maybe I'm not ready to go quilt these big, petals. I can quilt it just about the size of a finger, just a little narrow. And then I'm going to echo, echo, echo. And it's the echoing that's really going to build that up. And then as I'm adding it, and you can definitely check out the tutorial that will talk a little bit more about, you know, how to add these, and we won't get into that. But here's what's happening. All that echoing is really building it up and helping hide any errors. Even if you don't love how your spine looks or echoing isn't perfect, it doesn't matter. There's just so much of it. It's just going to help fill it in. Now this design definitely goes into a bigger area. So this is not something I'm going to try to cram into some little piecing. If I have it as an all over or maybe as a border design, and I'm going to work my way all the way around. And if I don't have room for petals, what am I going to do? Echo. The answer is almost always echo. And I have this kind of elegant kind of shape. And if you don't like dense quilting, it doesn't matter. You can spread out your lines. I would quilt them about 1/4 to a 1/2 inch apart, but you could really spread that out if you wanted. And then to branch off, I'll just make my next little curl and echo, echo, echo. So if you want feathers, but you're just not there yet with the other design, this is going to be a great option. We won't get into this too much. There, you can go check out the tutorial for tips, but I would make sure I filled in any areas and then move on. So definitely beautiful, and you can use this any way that you would normally use a flower or a feather design. So, all right, let me click back over here. Coloring time is over. I really love drawing those out. They're just too much fun. All right, I'm going to pop back over here just to see. Yes, so this is perfect. The only, Jane said, the only feathers so far have been in borders, but you can use feathers anywhere. Blocks of all sizes. It's a background filler. It could be a motif. I mean, it's just really fun. Smaller sashing or smaller strips, you can just quilt one side of the feather. Great way to use that. I use a draw pad and dare them so I can draw them so I can see how they improve. For sure, for sure. Any kind of drawing thing. So Karen said, you know, a mirror, dry erase mirror, definitely. It's kind of funny. My quilting studio has a huge mirror because it used to be like a ballerina studio, and so I'll go over there and draw on it sometimes. It's really pretty fun. Okay, so again, if you have any questions once this is over, you can definitely leave them in the comments below, and you can let me know what you think about the feathers. I am kind of checking on the chat, but it's kind of hard to read that as it's going, and definitely give the video a thumbs up while you're at it. So every week we do giveaways, and last week, if you remember, our giveaway was a copy of the Quilting is My Therapy coffee table book. Karen G, I don't know how to say it. Karen G won it. I've already emailed her. She's already emailed back. So if you're not her, you haven't won. I'm sorry. But I do have another weekly giveaway for you, and it is just in time for Valentine's Day. It's a free Quilt Love Kit. So this is a little project that we whipped up. We designed it so the pattern is available, and it features my fabric, inked rainbow, and it's available in 5 different colorways. So blue, yellow, green, purple, and red. And so one lucky winner will win the kit to make this out of the colorway of their choice. And if you don't win, you can get the kit or the pattern, or we actually have a virtual class on that as well. So you can check that out. Because here's my thought. You could give it to your quiltsy, your best quilting friend. You know, like a quiltsy is somebody that knows exactly how big your stash is but doesn't judge you. Yeah, that kind of person. Or you can just hang it on your wall. So to enter the giveaway, what you're going to do is after the video is over, you're going to check out the description box, and there's a link. You'll click on the link and enter your email, and I'll pick a winner next week. So after the video, you can do that. Speaking of next week we're going to do another live chat. It's going to be called Help, How Do I Quilt It? Practical ideas for picking quilting designs for your quilts. Because sometimes deciding what to quilt can be more difficult than actually doing it. So you'll definitely have to check that out. Same time, same place. All right, so if you've enjoyed this, I hope that you'll subscribe to the channel or visit me again next Thursday when we talk about quilting designs. And again, please, if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments after this live chat is over. I would love to get on there and help you because I love talking about feathers, and they can be a really great design if you need a little help getting those done. All right, y'all, stay safe, and I will see you next week. Happy quilting.